I'm on. Okay. Ben's giving me a little outline here for posterity. A few words about the past. First item he's got is Island Park. Of course, I grew up in Island Park. And he mentions Babe Ruth and Grandpa and Grandma. I saw Babe Ruth play. Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig at Yankee Stadium. And the big reason was my father was a big sports fan. He was a great baseball player himself. He played at Fordham when he went to Fordham, although he was quite a character, my father. I think when he was a freshman, he was playing third base at Fordham, and the coach had them play the varsity, the freshmen against the varsity. And my father said they were beating the varsity. They had a good team. And the coach pulled some shenanigans to let his varsity win. You know, he pulled some tough stunts. My father quit. He was that kind of a guy. He never played baseball again for Fordham. But he used to play in Island Park when we lived there. He played with a group. They were the Cork Lakes, I guess they called it. Right across the street from where we lived. He was a good ball player. It was a good thing he had Jake. That Jake came along. I wasn't much of a ball player. I played here and there, but Jake came along and Jake was great. But in any event, my father was a little bit of an athlete, and he took me to ball games. I saw a World Series one time way back. I think it was his Cardinals against the Yankees, just a little kid. I saw the Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. They were past their prime, obviously, but it was in Yankee Stadium. Babe Ruth was still with the Yankees. And football. My father went to Fordham, and Fordham in those days, back in the 20s and 30s, Fordham was a big football power. The 7 blocks of granite along the line. Of course, they were low-scoring games, and they didn't have the high-scoring offenses. And Fordham was one of the best, and my father used to bring me into all the Fordham games. We used to go to the Polo Grounds. They played the Polo Grounds, which doesn't even exist anymore. And we saw all the good teams come in. I remember the Pittsburgh Fordham was one of the big rivalries. And NYU was a good football team back in those days. I remember one year Fordham was good enough. They played Ben just handed me another one. Grandpa, this is Grandpa Probst you're talking about.
Was Grandpa Williams mayor, and was he there when he took off from Roosevelt Field?
No, that was Grandpa Probst.
Oh, okay.
Grandpa Probst, yeah. But in any event, so I used to get to see all the football games, the Fordham games. My father being an alumnus, and he enjoyed all the football. I remember one time when Fordham was playing at Pittsburgh, my father at the last minute, he was down at JP's. It wasn't JP's then. JP's was a bar and grill. JP was my grandfather, John Paul Williams. He bought it from Otto Heineman. I knew the place when the Heinemans owned it. Otto Heineman and Sophie Heineman. They had 2 boys, Donald and Bobby, and I used to hang around with the Heineman boys. I even worked there. We used to wash dishes in the back once in a while, get a dime or 15 cents, whatever it was. I remember one time Fordham was going to play Pittsburgh, and I think it was, I forget, the Friday night, whatever it was, and my father talked Otto into leaving early. They got in the car and they drove all the way to Pittsburgh to watch Fordham play Pittsburgh. And that's before the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So it was not an easy drive getting from Long Island. There was no Verrazano Bridge. It was a tough trip. No Jersey Turnpike and no Pennsylvania Turnpike. God only knows how you even made the trip. But I also remember he took me to a football. We went with Doc Adler. Doc Adler was a good friend of my father's. He had a drugstore in town, just down from Heineman's Bar and Grill. They used to play a lot of poker at Doc Adler's. My father was a good poker player, and he said Doc Adler was the best. But one time, he and Doc Adler and I went we saw Notre Dame play Army. Now, back in those days, that was a big game. Big enough they played at Yankee Stadium. Notre Dame and Army. Army was a good team. Notre Dame was a great team. It was a good rivalry. And I remember that game, I think Notre Dame won it 6-0. And if you look up in the record book, I think you'll find that the quarterback on Notre Dame was a guy by the name of Shakespeare. And it may have been William Shakespeare. But in any event, so that covers a lot of the, my early childhood with my father, who was, I said, was a sports lover and loved to talk about it, he played a lot of baseball, and he played a lot of golf. Like, he'd only go out to play if they would play 36 holes. Go out in the morning, they'd play 18, and then have lunch, and then go out in the afternoon and play another 18. He introduced me to golf when I was 18, I guess. Took me out to Bethpage and taught me the game, and ended up buying me clubs that year. He bought me a set of, I think it was a set of irons for Christmas and a set of woods for my birthday, which was a few months later. And I started playing a lot of golf then. When I was in the Navy, I was stationed at Lido Beach, which was right near home. Had a lot of time off, and I used to go over there with Bobby Heineman, one of the Heinemans I mentioned before, and Whitey Marinock, another golfer. In fact, that's where I started smoking. My first smoke was during a rainstorm, and we were under trees, Bethpage, and they both smoked, and we were just waiting for the rain to stop. And I said, give me one of those things. That was a big mistake. It took me about 30 years to finally quit the damn things. They were not good for me. Grandma and Grandpa. Island Park was a big, was a town. We lived there forever, and the Williams family was fairly influential because my father, he was on the school board for years. He was the village attorney. He was the mayor for 1 year. And if you go to Island Park, you'll see that if you go to the firehouse, on the plaque, you'll see Francis J. Williams was the attorney. He did the legal work when they built the new firehouse and the current firehouse in Island Park. And right across from the firehouse, there's a series of small cut-off streets that permit you to turn into slanty streets without making very sharp turns. They chop off a little piece, and there are homes, maybe one home on it. And they started naming them after mayors, and they named one of them is Williams Lane. My father didn't go to the ceremony. He refused. He said, hell, if they named Long Beach Road after me, I would have gone. He said, I'm not going to the ceremony for that small piece of street. And of course, my mother started a library in Island Park. She was, that's when I was a small kid, grammar school. She and Talbot, Charlie Talbot was the mayor at the time, and his wife, can't remember her first name now, but she and my mother decided the town needed, I think the Talbots, the mayor decided that the town should have a library. My mother got involved. She was a graduate of Columbia, Barnard, she went to Barnard, and they started a library. Opened up a storefront in town, and the books were delivered to our house. So we had first dibs on all the new books. She used to stamp them and mark them however she did, and then they end up down in the store where people could borrow them. But they started out in our house, and all the good ones we read first. That's what we did. No TV, radio a little bit, and the three of us would be in the living room, in the evening, each in a different chair with a book. And that's how we spent most of the nights, as I recall. We always have a book. And my father was pretty clever. He used to like a lot of the Ring Lardner stuff. Some of it was pretty funny, and he'd be laughing over there, and he'd always read passages to us and laugh. That's what he used to do. The town paper was the Echo. Echo Davis ran the paper. It was a little newspaper, small town newspaper. My father used to get the Echo, and he'd read mistakes into it, grammar mistakes. He'd read them in and laugh like hell, But some of the good times. Oh, the other thing I remember now about my father, you start remembering different things. When he used to mind me, when I was a real small kid, and I still remember, my father was he was a great sleeper. He'd bring me upstairs, I'd be anxious to play and do this and do that. He'd bring me upstairs, he says, okay, we're gonna play some sleeping games. He said, I'm gonna make believe I'm asleep, and you be a little fly, and you buzz around, and you buzz in my ear or something, I'll wake up. Yeah, so, I love that. Well, after about 2 or 3 times, he didn't jump up, he was asleep. He loved those sleeping games because he'd end up going to sleep and I'd end up sitting there doing nothing until my mother came home. That was his idea of babysitting. So, let me see. Ben's got me moving on to World War II, which for me was really nothing. I ended up in World War II, which in the Navy. While the war was still on, I was up at MIT at the time. I was in my second semester. It was a 3-semester time period during the war. They wanted you out in a hurry, and I started in June of '44 at MIT. Finished the first semester in September or whatever. Finished the second one in almost February, and I was going to be 18 in March, so I took an EDI test to get into the Navy. Most of the college kids were doing that. It was Captain Eddie in the Navy, and he had some kind of an electronics school he had developed. And he had this test that he put out, and if these kids could pass the test, they get into the Navy, went to electronics school, and they joined the Navy as seaman first class. Normally, you get in as an apprentice seaman, and it took you a while to make seaman first. But if you passed the EDI test, you were seaman first class. So, along with a bunch of other college kids, I took the EDI test, passed it, and enlisted in the Navy. And then I was going to be 18. Everybody did it to avoid the Army. Nobody wanted to be in the Army. Navy appeared to be a cleaner, more fun place if there was any fun involved in the war. But they let me finish the next semester, which didn't end until June. And then I just sat home until they called me, and it wasn't until August the 1st that they called me. And I went out to Great Lakes, went to Boston, got on the train, put me out to Great Lakes, and 2 weeks later the war was over. They dropped the bombs, the atomic bombs, and that was it. The war ended. They didn't know what to do with us. They kept us out there on general duty, and they finally, we must have had them a little bit over a barrel for this electronics school. I'm not sure exactly what. But they said, look, if you guys sign out of the program, see, they wanted us to sign out of the program. Otherwise, I think they have some obligation to keep us in it. And we'll send you to the separation center nearest your home for general duty until you're discharged. Well, for me, that was a no-brainer because the separation center nearest my home, I could walk between the two of them. It was right on the ocean in Lido Beach, what used to be a hotel, and they had converted it, as a matter of fact, they had converted it to a CB training center. It used to be a big golf course. A lot of celebrities play golf there. I caddied there for a while. And my uncle's company, Harold Casey, he was the chief estimator for the Crow Construction Company. They're the ones who converted it to the Navy. They converted it into a CB training center. And of course, the war was over, and they used it as a separation center. All the guys, Navy, around that area of the East Coast, they sent there, and they spent a couple of days, went through all the paperwork, and out they went. So I was assigned there. I said, yeah, I signed out. Got there around, I think it was around Thanksgiving time, 46, and 45. Got there in 45, and was discharged in the next August 26th. So I went in August 1st, 1945. I was discharged August 26th, 1946. So a year and a couple of weeks, and that was it for me. But it was a good deal because it really paid the rest of my tuition at MIT. Not that it was that high at that time. And it probably kept me out of the Korean conflict, because I was a veteran, even though I never was on a boat. I saw the ocean, but only from the sandy shores at Lido Beach.
And that's why Germany surrendered.
That's why, no, Germany had already surrendered.
They heard that you were in.
Japan surrendered when I got in. Yeah, right. 2 weeks after I got in, they said, forget it. and they gave up. So that was my World War II experience. But Ben wanted me to talk a little bit about, he's got Northwest, Tullabee, Washington, Thresher, Rickover. So I spent, after I got out of school, I ended up taking a job, several jobs after my initial job, up with Combustion Engineering up in Windsor, Connecticut. And the job was to design and build a new class nuclear submarine. It's going to be a hunter-killer type submarine. The Tullabee is the name of it. And we were up there, and they were going to build a prototype on the site, which consisted, was an actual sub-hull, except for the living quarters, etc. It contained all of its equipment, nuclear equipment, machinery, propulsion machinery, and it was built with the standard submarine hull and everything else. And Rickover insisted that all of the people in his program trained first on a land-based prototype. Then they went to the ship itself. So we designed that thing, and after it was designed and it was starting to be built, Rickover wanted people from Combustion to go out to Idaho, a certain group to go out to Idaho and train with the Navy out in Idaho, and come back to get chief operator licenses, chief reactor operator licenses, and then come back so we could operate our own facility. And out in Idaho was the prototype for the Nautilus, the first nuclear submarine. The prototype was built out in the desert, out from Idaho Falls. We all lived in Idaho Falls and took an hour bus trip every day out to the Nautilus prototype where we trained. And we were on shift with the Navy, 3 shifts. But that was a lot of fun out there. Idaho was an interesting place, and we went out with the 3 kids. We had 4. We had twins, Jeannie and Patrick. Patrick turned a year old on the trip. We drove from Connecticut out to Idaho. It was a heck of a trip. And we stopped for about a week in Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, University of Kansas, because Jones' 2 brothers and brother-in-law, Bobby, Johnny, and their wives, and Vereen and Robert Pansman. They were all living in dorms out at the University of Kansas, and they had opened up a pizza restaurant. Bobby Coach was the first one out there. Johnny was working out in the West Coast someplace. Robert Pansman was on the East Coast working with his father. And they got the phone call from Bobby. He said, come on, you guys, get to Lawrence. They never even heard of a pizza out here. We're going to open up a pizza restaurant. Go to school and make some money. So that's what they did. They quit their jobs and moved to Lawrence, Kansas, and opened up a pizza, Roberto's. They claimed that the pizza was from an old Neapolitan recipe, So we stopped there for about a week. It was great. It was a lot of fun. We got to see Roberto's, and see the university. But in any event, out in when I was training out in Idaho, a couple of good stories there. What you had to do as you trained, you had to get signed off on different systems. You had to get through, you had to walk the system, look at it, study it, read about it, and then you got quizzed on it by somebody who said, okay, you know enough, and they signed your card, and then you finally had to get the ship supervised. It was the final signature on the card. So Alvarezzo and I were on the same ship, Crew B. We were on Crew B, and I think it was a midnight shift. And we were up there, and we needed a signature from the ship supervisor. So we went up to see the ship supervisor, and he wasn't in his office. So we asked somebody, where is he? Oh, he's in one of the back study rooms. He's doing something. So we went back there, and at that time, there were there was a PCO on site. The PCO in Rickover's program was a prospective commanding officer. Guy who was going to take command of a nuclear submarine. And they obviously didn't train the way everybody else did. They were on their own. the training, because you couldn't have any, sailors quizzing these guys about anything. They were top-ranking military officers. So they had a PCO out there at the time, and his exec. The exec's name was Hennifer. The PCO, I can never remember his name. But in any event, later on I saw him many times on television, many times, because he was the PCO, the prospective commanding officer for the USS George Washington, which was the first ballistic missile nuclear submarine. And, the first one to shoot missiles from underwater, break the water and head wherever they wanted it to go. Nuclear warheads. Most powerful weapon in the world. And may still be. So they were out there training, and so we went in this back study room, and there was the ship supervisor standing behind the desk and sitting up on the desk with a towel wrapped around him as this PCO for the George Washington, and the ship supervisor's giving him a haircut. So Al Rizzo and I, we could talk to these guys. We were civilians, so we had no problem. When we laughed like hell, we said, "What the hell's going on here? Got a barber shop here or something?" So it turned out that Rickover, who had a terrible, well-deserved bad reputation for being a real miserable son of a bitch, miserable as could be, and he had shown up. He always showed up unannounced at his sites, and he'd start looking, and he'd find things wrong, and he was guaranteed to find things wrong. So he, on this particular occasion, he went around the site, found a few problems, and then all of a sudden he said, "Where the hell's my PCO?" And somebody said, "Oh, he's in Idaho Falls," which is an hour away, down in town, getting a haircut. That was the last time a PCO went to Idaho Falls for a haircut. So here's the most powerful commander to be in the world getting a haircut out at the site, all because of Rickover. And found somebody who had done it previously, had gone into town to do it, and taken time off from this training. So that was pretty good. Then we went back. We ended up going back to started up our own plant and ran it for years.
You did systems on the George Washington?
No. Only on our own submarine, the Tullabee. Yeah, we designed. Yeah, the guys who went out there were from different groups. I was a designer of two of the support systems on the submarine. The freshwater cooling system, which provided cooling water to a lot of the equipment, and also the cooling charging and valve operating system. They had big, huge valves, special hydraulic valves.
Is that why they called you after Fukushima?
After what?
The Fukushima?
The Fukushima was something else. That's another story. Fukushima. I'll get to that in a minute. But so I designed a couple of systems, and then they wanted us to go out to Idaho to train. So we came back and we did. We trained people. One of the guys who was there was a guy called Wes Harvey. He was the chief engineer for the Navy people. There were a lot of Navy people on the site. I remember he was in charge of also the coffee. Coffee was a big deal on the site. Had a guy come along, and if he could sell them coffee, all the coffee they needed, then he would provide the baking, the coffee makers. And the coffee makers were unbelievably big. They were great coffee makers, big, probably thousands of dollars involved in it. But to sell the coffee, because Navy guys, I couldn't believe it. They drank coffee all day long, those guys. Usually black coffee, all day long. And Wes, I remember the chief engineer, he used to collect the money for this stuff. He'd have a stack of bills in his hand. He could choke a horse for, to give this guy when he delivered the coffee. He gave him the free urns, the coffee urns and everything. But Wes was there, and Wes turned out, he was going to be a PCO himself. Not for the Tullabee. That was Jortberg was the guy who was going to be the PCO for the Tullabee, the actual ship. We were on the prototype, obviously. And so Jortberg was there monitoring people, looking, because he was going to be picking his crew from these guys, you know. And Wes Harvey, it turned out, was also going to be a PCO, and he was also looking things over to pick a crew for his ship. Turned out later that the ship that he was going to take over as commanding officer was at that time being refurbished up at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard up in New Hampshire. And he later on, we were listening to the radio, Mom and I, on television, and it turned out that the Thresher was the ship, the sub, and the Thresher went down. And it was, you know, they said John Harvey was the commanding officer, but we knew him as Wes Harvey. He was the guy, and some of the crew members, obviously, I had known, because they came from the site, you know, the S1C site. I guess they came out of Portsmouth, the story was, and they were going to do the deep sea trial, the dive, and so they were diving in the deep part of the ocean, off the banks, and they developed a leak. And apparently the leak was big enough so that it flooded the front of the sub at a down angle, and I think the last report they had from Wes Harvey over the communication, he was in communication with ships, you know, surface ships up above during the test period, and he told him he could not get enough angle. He was trying desperately to, you know, turn the sub so it would go up instead of down, but it couldn't do it. So it imploded, you know, it was deep enough, and that was it. That was a sad thing, because I knew some of those guys. But Ben mentioned the Fukushima reactors, and later on when I left combustion, I ended up with an outfit called United Nuclear, and we were into nuclear things in general, including we made fuel in New Haven. I got involved in some of that. I was also a project manager for the Elk River reactor, which was out in Minnesota. Small demonstration reactor. And it was pretty interesting because we got the job, government gave us the job to report to both the government and help provide technical support for the reactor, because it was a very small utility. They already had a support group that they had to give up, but they liked their support group. It was an outfit from Washington area, and what they did, they shut the plant down. Rather than let us go out there and help them, they shut the plant down, said we no longer have a viable support group, the whole bit. And I was going out there to start getting familiar with people, getting to know the plant, because I was going to be the project manager, you know, providing them the support they needed. They didn't even want me out there. So I ended up going out there, and I finally got people to, you know, I'm a pretty likable guy, I guess, I can be, and, you know, won them over to a certain extent. But that plant never operated again. They shut it down because we got the job, never operated again. Because they did have a leak, a known leak, and one of my first jobs was to see if we could determine where the leak was. And we went through some extensive testing, and we found the leak one night, and cut out the piece of pipe, and it was bad enough so that, and it had a history of problems, so that it never operated again.
The Mark II? A Mark II? Really?
We're back again? Good. Okay, so that was when I worked for United Nuclear, and what that utility, after the plant was shut down for good, they demanded that the government return the site to a pristine condition. They wanted everything taken away, removed, and so it was going to be a garbage job, you know. And I was project manager. I was starting to develop plans, you know, on the best way to do that. And I decided to. I didn't want to get involved in that, just in the field for me. And I took a job with at that time, the Atomic Energy Commission, and down in Washington. I got the job. It was a good job. And it slowly turned into, well, it didn't slowly, but after about 2 or 3 years, I think, they changed from the Atomic Energy Commission to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The reason being that the Atomic Energy Commission did two things. They regulated nuclear energy and they promoted nuclear energy, which isn't a good idea. If you're regulating something, it's the same thing you're promoting. So they decided to separate into two agencies, one of them being the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which I stayed with because I was in the regulatory end of it, and the other one was the Department of Energy. They continued to promote, but they were separate, completely separate agents. So I was down there. One of my first jobs was to I licensed the Browns Ferry Unit 2. There were 3 General Electric boiling and water reactors. A good friend of mine, Gus Lanus, had licensed Unit 1 and was studying Unit 2. When we got a promotion, I took over Unit 2 and I actually licensed it, and then left. But there was a fire down there just after I gave up the project to somebody else, because there was going to be a Unit 3 as well. I gave up the project to somebody else, and I became like a technical assistant for the guy in charge of boiling water reactors. But they had a big fire down there. It was close to being a disaster. It started from a candle, just a regular old candle. They were in the control room and they were looking for leaks. They had a special the ventilation systems, go from cool places to hot places, radiation-wise. So the control room, obviously, you want that to be a place of very little radiation or contamination or anything, so that would kind of start there. And the ventilation system would leave. The fresh air would leave the control room and go to other places. And they were checking for leaks, because you'd have cables, tons of cables out of the control room, of course, running through the walls into the cable spreading room. And somebody was checking for leaks, and they just use a candle to check for leaks, which is fairly common in industry. It's a leak check for very small leaks. Hold the candle up near it, you can see the light, the flame flicker, and you've got a little breeze going over. I used to use it a lot at Con Edison. We used to look for condenser leaks. They were under high vacuum, and we'd candle the condenser looking for small leaks. In any event, I guess one of the leaks was a little bigger than normal, and it sucked in a little bit of flame, and the stuffing, whatever they had to seal the leak around the cables, caught on fire. And the fire burned through the material into the cable spreading room and got bigger. The cable insulation started burning. They started losing equipment. As cables would short out, they lose a pump, lose this. They were scared to death. The one thing that they're always afraid of in cable spreading rooms or with electrical fire, don't use water, because you're going to short stuff out. Don't use water. So they were afraid to put water on the damn thing, and finally it got serious. They lost enough equipment, cooling equipment, so that they could have faced a real problem when they finally decided to put the water on it. They put the fire out. But they had lost enough equipment to make it, they're going to be shut down for a long time to clean up the mess. And I went down there the next day because the project manager who had taken over from me, Tom Wambach, his wife was sick, he couldn't travel. So I went down there with Vic Stello, very famous guy from the AEC, NRC. Went down with him, lawyers, the whole bit. We went down to, because they wanted to keep operating Unit 2. This was Unit 1, I think, had the fire. They wanted to keep operating Unit 2, and there were a lot of interties between the units. We went down there. We had to rewrite the technical specifications, which governed how they operate Unit 2, and we looked into the problems. Later on, that caused a flurry of activity because it changed the whole philosophy of how they considered fires. They looked into that, and man, I'll bet for 10 years, more than 10 years, they backfitted plants with all kinds of halon systems, CO2 systems, water systems, all over the plant. Anywhere there could be fires, you know, they had a system going on. So there was going to be a report to Congress on this, on this fire, and it was that serious. And they had a task force formed. I was on the task force. Vic Stello was in charge of it. I was given the job of going down there and trying to determine how close they came to calamity, you know, to a disaster. So in the process, I was down there, you know, talked with different people, and I discovered a few cooling techniques that they were not aware of, potential cooling techniques, and I think they would have been aware of them if they had needed to. But I came up with one that was a cooling system for the rod drive cooling, the rod drive pumps itself, the motors that ran the rod drives in and out of the core needed cooling, and they had special pumps to cool them. And I looked over diagrams, and it looked to me as though those pumps could have been used to get water into the pressure vessel if need be under an emergency. It looked like there was a valve you could open. And I talked to the people and said, yeah, we could get to that valve, but those pumps wouldn't do it. I said, well, I think they would. And I had them call up General Electric right there in the office, and got the guy, a pump expert from General Electric, and he agreed with me. He said, yeah, they could be used. He said, you might have burned out the motors if you weren't careful on the pressure of this, that, and the other thing, but he said, yeah, there are possibilities. And the other thing I came up with was a way to maybe siphon water through the main condensers to there are vacuum breakers on a lot of them, so that you didn't siphon the water through, but my thought was you could disable the vacuum breakers and establish a siphon effect, and that way get cooling water through the main condensers, which could have been used to do some cooling. But in any event, that was written up in congressional testimony. And we went down. I went down to Congress, sat through the hearings, didn't have to testify at all. Usually the upper level people were the only people who testified. So that was interesting. Now, that was back in 74, 5, I don't know, long time ago, you know. Talking about, 35 years ago, whatever. And all of a sudden they get the tsunami and the Fukushima reactors in Japan with all kinds of problems going on. You know, they didn't have no more cooling and this, that, and the other thing. And all of a sudden, I saw a picture on they showed a diagram of one of the plants. And I said, holy shit. I said, that looks like it's the old standard GE oil and water reactor. And then I heard somebody say, these things are old. You know, they could be 30, 40 years. I said, that's probably the same vintage as the Browns Ferry reactor. So I said, well, I went down there and I found a couple of ways to cool things. I said, I don't know whether it applies. You know, the information coming out of Japan was extremely sketchy. I didn't know what the hell was going on. So I got on the phone. I called up NRC to see if there was, because I knew there was a task force involved. You know, studying it already out of NRC. So I got somebody got on the phone and said, oh, yeah, I'll have somebody call you back.
Did they call you?
So they didn't call me back, and I remember later on that afternoon, I talked to my brother Willie, who's a character. Willie, it turned out, had called the Japanese embassy. He said, my brother knows some things that probably may not be important, but you should be aware of. You know, he was involved in a similar reactor, whatever. So I called NRC again. I get a different person, and they put me through to the task force. And I talked to the guy, gave him my story about the pumps for the rod drive motors, to cool the rod drive motors, the possibility of using them. And I said, I don't know what the story is over there. He says, well, he says, I'll get that information. We have somebody over there. I'll get that information to them. He said, but I don't think they have any power at all. I said, well, I know they've been, I see them with these water hoses. He said, well, they're coming off the fire trucks and everything, you know, they don't have anything. I said, can't they get a generator in there, so, you know, flying the diesel? You really didn't know what was going on, what the problem was. And so I did that. Then later on, I thought about the siphoning effect through the condensers, so I called them back, And I got some guy on the phone, he said, I'll tell you, call this number, he said, and he said, oh, you can send an email to this address, and we've got a group, they're analyzing all suggestions and everything. So I said, okay. So because I had told these guys who I was, you know, that I had been involved with the Browns Ferry fire and the whole bit. So they should have given me a little more attention than they did, I thought, but whatever. So I sent them an email, never heard back. And to this date, I don't have the slightest idea. Probably the suggestions didn't mean anything, they weren't of any use. But, you know, you didn't know. It was a little different. The people at the utility down in Browns Ferry, it was kind of new to them, so who the hell knows. But in any event, that was my involvement with the Fukushima reactors, the old Browns Ferry. As a matter of fact, I've got somewhere around.
Did they call you first or no?
No. No, they didn't know me from Adam. But they should have given me a little more respect, only because as soon as I told them, you know, that I had worked with the NRC and was involved with the same damn reactors in an emergency situation, they should have at least listened to me a little closer. Now, the one guy did. He accepted the information. He said he was going to get it over to Japan, but I don't know what happened. As a matter of fact, he is... There's the Browns Ferry. There's the schematic. They told you there were 3 plants, and there were a lot of interconnections between the plants, and there's the 3 of them. The schematic of the main, you can see the pressure vessels, the cores, and all that stuff. And on here you'll see some X's, and those were the systems that they were losing as the fire progressed. So I still had that. I found it up in the attic. The thing I couldn't find up in the attic, unfortunately, but which was available if anybody wanted to look closely enough, was the congressional testimony. I think it was written up in there as part of it. It was a big, thick book. You know, the testimony went on and on and on. But in any event, that was that story. Now, we just showed Ben some plants, then I got involved, left there, came up, changed jobs a couple more times. I ended up, pretty interesting job, and I was project manager to design and have built shipping casks for fuel that was being stored up in West Valley. It's in New York State. At one time, that was going to be a reprocessing facility, and it was decided we're not going to reprocess fuel in this country. And it was, shut down, no reprocessing. And the fuel they had there, ready to reprocess, they sent back to the utility that had sent it to them. However, at one point, they thought this was going to be a lucrative business, and they actually bought some of the fuel from 2 utilities, old fuel, and so they couldn't send it back to the utility. They owned it. And New York State was saying, get it out of there. So they got the Department of Energy to agree to, if the company who owned it could get casks designed to ship and store, the Department of Energy would accept those casks out in Idaho as a long-term storage kind of experiment. So,
5 minutes.
that's what happened.
25 minutes left.
We got the job. And we designed and had the casks built. Showed Ben pictures of the impact limiters. Huge, these things. We should have had that up here. We showed them, in the picture. But in any event, that was a pretty interesting job. And by the time I left, that was Transnuclear, was the name of that company. By the time I left, they still hadn't shipped it. They were having problems with NRC and getting approvals, getting licenses, and I ended up going back to the NRC. For the last 5 years of my career, and at that time I was project manager for the Indian Point plant up in New York, which is a pretty controversial plant. It was interesting, and I retired as project manager. I was commuting. Joan didn't want to move down to Washington, so I had enough of the Jersey Turnpike commuting. Every other weekend I came home. And so I just retired. I was almost 69 at the time, so I'd worked long enough, I thought, and came home and haven't done much since, except sing. Studied Spanish for a while, and I sing. But Ben here wanted me to talk a little bit about what I remember about the Casey thing. So I mean, Ben just came up with the. Here's a picture of the Tullabee. The Tullabee, we designed, had it built, an electric boat, you know, and we trained Navy on the prototype of the Tullabee. There's a Tullabee, and here, I told you about the shipping and storage casks. We had them built in Japan. And here it is, shipped up to West Valley. One of them, we had two of them, the Burp and the Reg. The Burp was for the Big Rock Point fuel, and the Reg was the Army Yanay fuel. And here I am standing beside one of them, up at West Valley, so you can see the size of the damn thing.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Okay, good. Ben asked me to check my memory a little bit on a little family history, and I'm not good at that. Never tried to trace the family history. Will he be better than I was? My father's parents, Irish as could be. He came from Ireland. He was a young guy. I think he was 16. His mother died over there. His father remarried, and he refused to kiss his new mother. And his father beat him or whatever. He just left, came to America, worked, got enough money, and he got to get some brothers over. I think there were other relatives he brought over. But in any event, he became a fireman. He was a New York City fireman, and he loved it. My father said he absolutely loved it, and he got to be a commander, a battalion chief, I think. We're at the firehouse. He had his own room. He had his own quarters at the firehouse. And my father said he was a smoke eater. You know, he just loved going to those little fires. And I think he died from asthmatic conditions and probably from all the smoke that he ate. Because he died, I was only, I think I can remember being at his wake. But I was only a couple of years old. I think I remember being at his wake. And I've got pictures of him now, big handlebar mustache. And, William Francis Williams. That's who Willie, my brother Willie's named after, my father's father. I'm named after my father, so I'm Francis J. Williams Jr., and Jake was named after my mother's father, J.P. Williams, John Paul Williams. So all Irish on my father's side. My mother was, her father, J.P. Williams, John Paul Williams. Oh, by the way, my mother was a Williams before she married my father, who was a Williams. So she didn't have to change. She didn't have to change her last name. Her maiden name was Williams, which always gave me a lot of problems. They ask you on forms, fill out, what's your mother's maiden name? You know, you fill it out. They come back and say, we want your mother's maiden name. You know, I say, that's what it was. She married a Williams. But in any event, so my father he was another Irishman, J.P., and but my mother's mother, Anna Williams, was, Annie we call her, was German. So, and Annie, being German, was a half-sister to Frida Casey. I'm not sure whether it's the same mother, same father. I'm not sure about that relationship, but they were half sisters. Now, my mother and father got very friendly with my mother's half sister, Frida. Frida and Casey. She married Casey, who was the chief estimator for the Crow Construction Company. I mentioned that his company converted the Lido Beach Country Club to a CB training center. That was his company. And was the estimator for it. But I'll tell you a quick story about Unc, how we got that job, the chief estimator, which is a good job. That's the biggest job in any construction company, is the estimator. If he overestimates, they never get a job. If he underestimates, they lose money. So it's the job in any construction company, and he was the guy. But he went to RPI, engineer, civil engineer, and when he got out, he got a job with the New York subway system. So he knew quite about it, that was under construction at the time. He knew quite a bit about the system. But it was, it was kind of a city job. Wasn't all that great. He went out to lunch one day and he bumped into a guy that he knew from school. And they had lunch, they talked, and the guy said, by the way, he said, I'm working for the Crow Construction Company and I'm quitting. He said, you might be interested, you could come over, you'd be first in line to, take over my spot. I do some estimating for them. And that's how I changed out of the subway system to Crow Construction Company. He became the chief estimator. Very, very great guy. So Unc and Frida. Unc and Frida, at the time I was growing up, lived in Freeport, Long Island. Long before they moved up to Danbury, They lived in Freeport, Wakefield, I forget the name of the street. I can see it as clear as can be. And my parents were very friendly with Frida and Unc. And at the time I was a kid, every Thanksgiving we were at Frida and Unc's. Every Thanksgiving. And of course, Frida and Annie were both German. And after dinner, they had an easel, and they had a little pointer. Annie would be the singer. She would be the lead singer. And they had on the easel was a little strip you could fold down the pieces of paper to get to the next sheet. And it had all the words and pictures. And the song was about, I think it was about utensils and plates. And Annie would start out, and it was in German. It was all in German. Ist das nicht, I guess, isn't this we'd say, kurz und lang, I think, which was maybe fork and spoon or something. Ist das nicht, a kurz und lang? And then we would all respond, ja, das ist a kurz und lang, on ist das nicht, whatever the next one was. Ja, das ist a, and then everybody would say, du schöne, du schöne, kurz und lang. And then ist das nicht, and whatever it was. Like, every Thanksgiving we do that. It was a lot of fun. We had a great time. And then we played football in the street. Frida and Unc had Bill. Bill was their son, their only child, Bill Casey, and he went to Lehigh. I remember one Thanksgiving he brought a buddy of his home. I almost remember the guy's name. He was a wrestler. He wrestled. Lehigh was a big wrestling school, and he was on the wrestling team. He came down with Bill. I remember, he was wrestling. I used to be, my cousin Lonnie and I would be there all the time, and they'd wrestle. We were much smaller than they were, but they'd, fool around with us. As a matter of fact, Bill went to Lehigh. One time, my mother and father went up with Frida and Unc as chaperones. There was a big party that was being thrown. They needed chaperones, and my mother and father went to Lehigh with Unc and Frida. They did lots of vacations together, down into, I think a homestead in Virginia. Went to the homestead a few times. They were very, very, very close. And then, of course, I remember, then there was another branch of the family, which was in Philadelphia. They were the Welches. Kitty Welch and Dave Welch. And they had a couple of children, young David Welch, who was around a lot. Later, he's a good friend of Bill's, Bill Casey's. And I remember they used to come in and visit, and we'd all be at Long Beach. I have pictures somewhere of the Welches, Frida and Unc, my parents, Annie, my grandmother, all on the beach in Long Beach. The women all in there over the big black bathing suits with the pantaloons, whatever the hell they were. And I remember David Welch, the father, not the son, but the father. He was a little guy, wiry guy. And he was like an acrobat almost. He could do backflips on the sand, and I remember him doing all that kind of stuff. But now what else was there about Philadelphia? I remember we visited. I remember they out there. The big parade is not the plumber. There's a big parade out in Philadelphia every year, and we go out for that and visit the Welches. And then of course Frida and Unc moved up to Danbury. Turned out they bought the oldest house in Danbury. And Unc was a great carpenter, a great fixer-upper. He did a lot of stuff for that house. It was just a great house. And they had, and Bill had moved up there. I think Bill had moved up there first. He moved to Ridgefield, and he had a couple of different businesses before he finally settled on the one that was most successful was the oil business, which is still there, Casey Oil, Casey Fuel Oil. But at the time we moved to I actually moved to Joan and I moved to Ridgefield with our kids. Bill had a real estate business. He had a gas station, the Texaco gas station, and he had the oil business. And of all of them, I think the oil business was the one that flourished the most. And he had sold the Texaco gas station to a couple of guys who were German guys. I remember who I used them because I had a Volkswagen one time. I figured the Germans knew the Volkswagen. And it turned out I would see a sign one day, and it was BMW. I didn't know what the hell it was. I thought it was the British Motor Works or something, and it was a new car, the BMW, that they were selling there. And it turned out those guys probably became millionaires because BMW, of course, took off, and they opened up a huge showroom and everything else on Route 7, between Ridgefield and Danbury, which I think still exists up there. So let's see, what else would
Katie and Sean. No, Sean.
Oh, Sean. Well, yeah. We moved to Ridgefield, and let's go back a little ways. Relationships. My father was the best man at Frida and Valerie's wedding. They get married in St. Patrick's, and I remember my father always saying he felt like a shrimp. My father was a little shorter than I was. He was probably 5'8", and Bill was a 6-footer. Valerie was a 6-foot model. She was beautiful. I think the one, the Lady of Honor was the maid of honor was another model friend, and I think my father said the priest was a big guy, so he felt like a shrimp there. But anyway, he was the best man, and then later on, the youngest, now Laddie I think was the youngest. But Katie, my father was the godfather to Katie Casey. I think Willie told me that he may have been there at the baptism, and that my father may have stumbled a little bit on the I believe, which is easy enough to do. Like all of us do, you forget your mumble a little bit, and make up your mistakes. But anyway, so there was a very close relationship there all the time. I guess it was a little less so with the Welches from Philadelphia. But all in all, I don't know a lot about all the cousins, uncles, who else existed in there. Willie may have a better idea than I do. And you could probably get on the internet and one of these family history things and develop a lot of information yourself. But in any event, Mom and Maureen Hackett started a model agency and really a place to find sites for photographers, ad agencies. Ridgefield is a great place for that. There are a lot of beautiful settings, and they started with the model agency, and Sean was one of the first models that they had on there.